My mom left me with my evil stepdad, and he kicked me out. 5 years later, they came to me for help, and I told them this. I, 18M, have been living with my mom and stepdad for the past 5 years. My life took a drastic turn when my biological dad passed away in a car accident when I was 10. It was a difficult time for both my mom and me. We struggled emotionally and financially for a few years, until my mom met Mark when I was 12. They dated for a year and got married when I was 13. From the beginning, it was clear that Mark didn't like me. He always saw me as a burden and a constant reminder of my mom's past relationship. I remember the day they got married. While everyone was celebrating, I caught Mark giving me a cold, calculating look. It sent shivers down my spine, but I brushed it off, thinking it was just wedding day jitters. Growing up, I tried my best to get along with Mark. I helped around the house, kept my grades up, and even tried to engage in activities he enjoyed, like watching football or helping him with yard work. But no matter what I did, it was never enough. He'd always find ways to criticize me or make me feel unwelcome. Mark would make snide comments about how I wasn't his real son or how I was just wasting space in his house. He'd say things like, "If it were up to me, you'd be out on the street where you belong." Or, "You're lucky your mother loves you because no one else would put up with a useless kid like you." These comments hurt, but I tried not to let them get to me. My mom would try to mediate when she witnessed these interactions, but she often sided with Mark to keep the peace. She'd say things like, "He doesn't mean it that way," or "You need to try harder to get along with Mark." It felt like I was constantly walking on eggshells in my own home. Things got worse as I got older. When I turned 16 and got my first part-time job at a local grocery store, Mark demanded that I pay rent. My mom thought it was a bit harsh, but agreed that it would teach me responsibility. So, a significant portion of my meager paycheck went to Mark each month, leaving me with little to save or spend on myself. Recently, my mom got an amazing job opportunity abroad. She was offered a 6-month contract in Europe, which could potentially lead to a permanent position. When she first told me about it, I saw the excitement in her eyes. It was the first time in years I had seen her truly happy about something. But my happiness for her was quickly overshadowed by anxiety about living alone with Mark. I expressed my concerns to my mom, telling her about how Mark treated me when she wasn't around. I recounted incidents where he'd accidentally break things I cared about, like the model airplane my dad and I built together before he died, or how he'd forget to buy groceries I could eat, knowing I had dietary restrictions. But my mom brushed it off, saying I was exaggerating and that Mark was just strict. She told me to give him a chance and that living together might help us bond. The day my mom left was one of the hardest of my life. As we stood at the airport, I hugged her tightly, fighting back tears. I wanted to beg her to stay, to not leave me alone with Mark, but I couldn't bring myself to dampen her excitement. As she walked through the security checkpoint, Mark put his hand on my shoulder. To anyone watching, it might have looked like a comforting gesture, but his grip was painfully tight. "Let's go home, boy," he said, his voice cold. "Things are going to be different now." And different they were. From the moment we got home, things went downhill. Mark started yelling at me for the smallest things. He'd scream if I left a dish in the sink or if I came home 5 minutes later than usual. One time, I accidentally left a light on in my room when I went to school. When I came back, I found that Mark had removed all the light bulbs from my room. "If you can't remember to turn off the lights, you don't deserve to have any," he said with a smirk. He threatened to kick me out multiple times, saying he was only letting me stay because of my mom. "One wrong move," he'd say, "and you'll be out on the street. And who do you think your mom will believe? Me, her loving husband, or her ungrateful brat of a son?" I tried to keep my head down and avoid confrontation, but it was becoming unbearable. I couldn't focus on my studies, and my mental health was deteriorating. My grades started slipping, and I was constantly anxious and depressed. I called my mom a few times to tell her what was happening, but she always seemed distracted and told me to work it out with Mark. I could hear the stress in her voice about her new job, and I didn't want to add to her worries. One night, about 2 months into my mom's absence, things came to a head. I'd been working late at my job, covering for a sick coworker. I texted Mark to let him know I'd be home late, but when I arrived, he was waiting for me, seething with anger. He accused me of lying, of being out doing drugs or getting into trouble. When I tried to explain, he called me worthless and said he was sick of having me around. In a fit of rage, he grabbed a box of my things, old photos, my dad's watch, some school mementos, and threatened to throw them out. I pleaded with him to stop, and in the struggle the box fell, and its contents scattered across the floor. As I scrambled to pick up my belongings, Mark towered over me. "This ends now," he growled. "I want you out of my house by tomorrow, or I'll throw you out myself." That was the last straw. I realized I couldn't take it anymore. Once Mark went to bed, I packed a bag with essentials and left in the middle of the night. I crashed at my best friend's place for a few days, before finding a small room to rent with my savings from my part-time job. I didn't tell my mom immediately because I didn't want to worry her or jeopardize her job opportunity. I figured I'd explain everything when she got back. I blocked Mark's number because he kept sending me threatening messages, saying he'd call the police and report me as a runaway if I didn't come back. It's been a month now, and I'm managing on my own. It's not easy. I'm working extra hours to cover rent and basic necessities while trying to keep up with school. Some days, I barely have enough to eat, but it's still better than living under Mark's roof. I feel guilty for leaving without telling my mom, but I also feel like I had no choice. The constant fear and stress were crushing me. So, Reddit, Aita, for leaving my stepfather's house while my mom was abroad? Should I have tried harder to make things work? Should I reach out to my mom now and explain everything? I'm lost and could really use some advice. Edit. Thank you all for your responses. I've read through them and appreciate the support. Many of you have asked about my living situation and future plans. I'm currently staying in a small studio apartment that I found through a friend. It's not ideal. The plumbing is temperamental and I can hear every move my neighbors make, but it's safe and affordable. I'm working part-time at a local diner and doing some online tutoring to make ends meet. As for school, I'm in my senior year and determined to graduate. I've been in touch with my school counselor about my situation, and they've been supportive in helping me stay on track. Some of you suggested reaching out to other family members. Unfortunately, my mom was an only child, and my grandparents passed away a few years ago. My dad's side of the family lost touch with us after he died. It's pretty much just been me, my mom, and Mark for the past few years. I'm still unsure about how to handle things when my mom returns. Part of me wants to tell her everything, but another part is scared she won't believe me or will side with Mark again. I guess I'll cross that bridge when I come to it. For now, I'm focused on staying afloat and finishing school. Thank you all again for your advice and kind words. Update 1. It's been 6 months since my original post, and a lot has happened. I wanted to update you all on the situation. My mom returned from her work trip abroad last week. I was nervous about facing her, but I was also looking forward to finally explaining everything that had happened with Mark. However, things didn't go as I had hoped. The day after she got back, I received a call from her. Her voice was cold and angry, nothing like the warm, loving tone I was used to. She demanded to know if it was true that I had stolen money from Mark and run away. I was shocked and confused. My mind raced, trying to understand where this accusation was coming from. I tried to explain what really happened, how Mark had been verbally abusive, how he had threatened to kick me out, and how I left for my own safety and mental health. I told her about the incident with the box of my belongings, about how Mark had made my life miserable every day she was gone. But my mom wouldn't listen. She kept insisting that Mark had shown her evidence of my theft. When I asked what evidence, she was vague, saying something about missing cash and suspicious bank transactions. I told her it was all lies, that I had never stolen anything in my life. I reminded her of how I'd always been honest with her, how I'd worked hard at my part-time job to contribute to the household. But it seemed like her mind was already made up. I begged her to meet me in person so we could talk face to face. After some persuasion, she agreed, but when we met at a local cafe, Mark was with her. The moment I saw him, my heart sank. He had a sorrowful expression on his face, but I could see the triumphant glint in his eyes. Mark put on a show of being concerned and disappointed in me. He spun a tale about how he had tried his best to take care of me while my mom was away, but that I had become rebellious and started stealing money to fund a party lifestyle. He talked about how he'd noticed cash missing from his wallet, how he'd seen suspicious withdrawals from their joint account. I was floored. Every word out of his mouth was a lie, but he told it so convincingly. He even had fake receipts and bank statements that he claimed proved I had been taking money. I don't know how he fabricated them, but they looked real enough to fool my mom. He talked about how he'd tried to confront me about it, but I had run away instead of facing the consequences. I tried desperately to defend myself, to tell my side of the story. I explained how I'd been working extra shifts to support myself, how I'd been struggling to make ends meet in my small apartment. I told them about the nights I'd gone to bed hungry because I couldn't afford both food and rent. I pleaded with my mom to remember how I'd always been responsible with money, how I'd never given her any reason to doubt me before. But Mark had clearly been working on my mom for weeks before she returned. He had poisoned her against me, making her believe I was a troubled, ungrateful kid who had taken advantage of her absence. He painted himself as the victim, a concerned stepfather who had only wanted to help his wayward stepson. The worst part was seeing the look of disappointment and anger in my mom's eyes. She told me she couldn't believe I would do this to her, that she had trusted me to behave while she was gone, when I tried to explain about Mark's behavior. She accused me of trying to shift blame and making up lies about my caring stepfather. "How could you do this to us?" she asked, her voice breaking. "We gave you everything, and this is how you repay us?" Her words cut deep, each one feeling like a physical blow. I couldn't understand how she could believe Mark over me, her own son. The meeting ended with my mom telling me she needed time to think about what to do next. She said she couldn't have me back in the house if she couldn't trust me. As they left the cafe, I saw Mark put his arm around my mom's shoulders, comforting her. The sight made me feel sick. Over the next few days, I tried repeatedly to reach out to my mom, to get her to listen to me without Mark's influence. But she either ignored my calls or replied with short, cold messages telling me to stop lying and take responsibility for my actions. I was desperate. I reached out to a few of my mom's friends, hoping they might be able to talk some sense into her. But it seemed Mark had gotten to them too. They all told me how disappointed they were in me, how they couldn't believe I would steal from my own family. Eventually, my mom sent me a long text message saying she had decided it was best if I didn't come back home. She said she was deeply disappointed in me and that she needed time to process everything. She told me not to contact her for a while. I was devastated. Not only had I lost my home, but I had also lost my mom, the one person I thought would always be on my side. Mark had managed to manipulate her completely, turning her against her own son. The next few weeks were a blur. I threw myself into work and school, trying to keep my mind off the gaping hole in my life where my family used to be. I had trouble sleeping, often lying awake at night replaying the conversations in my head, wondering what I could have said differently to make my mom believe me. My grades started to slip again, and I was at risk of not graduating. It took a concerned teacher pulling me aside to snap me out of my funk. She noticed the changes in me and asked what was wrong. After some hesitation, I told her everything. To my surprise, she believed me. She helped me get in touch with a school counselor and a social worker who could provide me with resources and support. With their help, I was able to get back on track with my studies and even secure some additional financial aid to help with my living expenses. Now, I'm trying to figure out my next steps. I'm still in my small apartment, working as much as I can to support myself. I've reached out to a few trusted teachers at school who have been supportive and are helping me navigate finishing high school as an independent student. I'm hurt, angry, and scared about the future. The betrayal by my mom stings deeply, and there are days when the loneliness feels overwhelming. But I'm also determined to prove Mark wrong and show my mom the truth someday. I don't know if our relationship will ever be the same, but I haven't given up hope entirely. For now, I'm focusing on graduating high school and planning for college. It won't be easy, but I'm determined to build a better life for myself, with or without my family's support. Thank you all for your support on my original post. If anyone has advice on how to move forward from here, I'd really appreciate it. How do I heal from this betrayal? How do I build a life for myself when I feel so alone? Any words of wisdom would be welcome. Update 2, 5 years later. It's been 5 years since my last update, and my life has changed dramatically. I wanted to share what's happened and get some perspective on a recent development. After high school, I threw myself into my studies and work. The pain of losing my family was still raw, but I channeled that hurt into determination. I managed to get a scholarship to a state university, majoring in computer science. To make ends meet, I juggled multiple part-time jobs, working at the university library, doing freelance web design, and even delivering pizzas on weekends. College was challenging, but also liberating. For the first time in years, I felt free from the constant fear and anxiety that had plagued me living with Mark. I made friends who became like family to me, and I even started seeing a therapist to work through the trauma of my past. I graduated with honors, landing a job at a promising tech startup right out of college. The work was demanding, with long hours and high pressure, but I thrived on the challenge. It felt good to be valued for my skills and work ethic. something I hadn't experienced in a long time. Over the past 3 years, I've worked my way up in the company. I started as a junior developer, but my dedication and innovative ideas caught the attention of the higher-ups. I was promoted to team lead within a year, and recently, I was made lead developer for our main product. Our startup recently secured a huge investment, catapulting us into the big leagues of the tech world. With this came a significant salary increase for me, along with stock options that could be worth a substantial amount if the company continues to grow. For the first time in my life, I'm not just financially stable, but comfortable. I bought my first car, moved into a nice apartment, and even started putting money aside for the future. Throughout this time, I had no contact with my mom or Mark. It was hard, especially during holidays and milestones like my college graduation and job promotions. There were nights when I'd lie awake, wondering if my mom ever thought about me, if she ever regretted believing Mark over me. But I focused on building a new life for myself and creating a chosen family with close friends and mentors. Last week, out of the blue, I received a call from a number I didn't recognize. When I answered, there was a moment of silence, and then I heard a voice I hadn't heard in 5 years. It was my mom. Her voice sounded tired and desperate, nothing like the confident, loving mom I remembered from my childhood. She told me she and Mark were in financial trouble. Apparently, Mark had made some bad investments, and they were facing foreclosure on their house. The company Mark worked for had gone bankrupt, leaving him unemployed for the past year. They had burned through their savings and were now drowning in debt. My mom apologized for everything that had happened years ago. Her voice cracked as she admitted that she had realized over time that Mark had been manipulating her. She said she regretted not believing me and that the guilt had been eating at her for years. She asked if we could meet to talk things over, to try and mend our relationship. I was stunned. For years I had imagined this moment, my mom realizing the truth, reaching out to reconnect. But now that it was happening, I felt a whirlwind of emotions, hope, anger, sadness, and a lingering sense of betrayal. After a long pause, I agreed to meet her at a cafe, the same one where we had our confrontation 5 years ago. When I arrived, I was surprised to see both my mom and Mark there. My mom looked older and worn down, her hair grayed and her face lined with worry. Mark seemed to have lost the arrogant air he once had, his shoulders slumped and his eyes downcast. They explained their situation in more detail. They were months behind on their mortgage payments, and the bank was threatening to take their house. Mark had lost his job when his company folded, and despite trying, he hadn't been able to find steady work since. My mom's salary as a teacher wasn't enough to cover their debts and living expenses. As they talked, I noticed the dynamic between them had changed. My mom seemed more assertive, often cutting Mark off or correcting him. Mark, on the other hand, appeared subdued, a far cry from the domineering man I remembered. Then came the real reason for their reaching out. They asked if I could lend them money to help them get back on their feet. They had heard through mutual acquaintances about my success in the tech industry and thought I might be in a position to help. I sat there, listening to their plea, feeling a mix of emotions. Part of me felt vindicated. They were finally admitting that Mark had lied and manipulated the situation years ago. But another part of me was angry that they only reached out when they needed something from me. My mom reached across the table, taking my hand in hers. "I know we don't deserve your help," she said, tears in her eyes. "What we did to you was unforgivable. But we're desperate. We have nowhere else to turn." Mark chimed in, his voice lacking the confidence it once had. "I know you have every reason to hate me," he said. "I treated you terribly. I let my jealousy and insecurity poison everything. I'm not asking for forgiveness, but I am truly sorry for what I did." Their apologies stirred up old memories and pain. I thought about the lonely nights in my tiny apartment, struggling to make ends meet. I remembered the feeling of betrayal when my own mother chose to believe a lie over her son's truth. After they finished talking, I took a deep breath and told them I needed time to think about it. I left the cafe without making any promises, their pleading eyes following me as I walked away. Now, I'm torn. On one hand, I've worked hard for my success, and I don't feel I owe them anything after how they treated me. Mark's lies cost me my relationship with my mom and forced me to fend for myself at a young age. Part of me wants to refuse and let them face the consequences of their actions. On the other hand, despite everything, I still care about my mom. The thought of her being homeless or struggling tugs at my heart. but I'm worried that if I help them, I'll be opening myself up to further manipulation or expectations of ongoing support. I'm also concerned about the impact this could have on my own financial stability. While I'm doing well now, I'm not sure if I can afford to bail them out without compromising my own future. The startup world is volatile, and there's no guarantee my current success will last. There's also the question of forgiveness. Can I truly move past what happened? Is it possible to rebuild a relationship with my mom after such a profound betrayal? And what about Mark? While he apologized, can I ever trust him or have him in my life again? I've spent the last week mulling over these questions, unable to come to a decision. I've talked it over with my closest friends and even brought it up in a session with my therapist. Everyone has different opinions, but ultimately, they all say the same thing. It's my decision to make. Part of me is tempted to help, to be the bigger person and extend an olive branch. Maybe this could be the first step in healing old wounds and rebuilding my relationship with my mom. But another part of me is scared of being hurt again, of opening myself up to the pain I've worked so hard to overcome. So, Reddit, I find myself asking once again, Ate, if I refuse to help my mom and stepdad financially after everything that's happened? Should I give them another chance, or protect myself and the life I've built? I'm at a crossroads, and I could really use some outside perspective.